The WWE locker room went completely silent, because this was not supposed to happen. Zayda Steel was gone. No hints, no rumors, no leaks, and then suddenly, she walked back in like nothing ever changed. Superstars were stunned, officials were confused, and one backstage reaction told us everything. To understand the gravity of this moment, you have to understand the usual rhythm of the backstage area. It is a place of constant, chaotic noise. There is the taping of wrists, the slapping of backs, the dull roar of producers shouting over headsets, and the endless drone of warm-up drills. It is a living, breathing ecosystem of ego and adrenaline. It never stops moving. It never stops making noise. Until today. Imagine the scene. A heavy steel door, usually guarded by security, creaks open. In the stickman world of our story, visualize the chaotic scribbles of the locker room figures running, lifting, talking suddenly, freezing in place. The animation should slow down to a near halt. The door didn't burst open. It glided, and through it walked a figure that everyone thought was history. Zayda Steel didn't walk in with an entourage. She didn't have a camera crew documenting a triumphant return for a reality show. She was dragging a single, battered gym bag. She wore plain clothes. Her expression wasn't one of arrogance, nor was it apologetic. It was the face of someone who was simply present. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was heavy. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears. In an industry built on rumors, where the dirt sheets know what you had for breakfast before you even order it, Zayda had achieved the impossible. She had become invisible. For months, the narrative was that she was done. The internet forums had moved on. The fantasy bookers had stopped writing her name in their dream matches. She had effectively vanished from the collective consciousness of the wrestling world, and yet, there she stood, checking her phone as if she had just stepped out to grab a coffee. Not disappeared for a significant chapter of her career. The reaction from the others in the room is where the story truly begins. We aren't talking about happy reunions, we are talking about confusion. One prominent superstar, sitting on a crate near the catering table, dropped a water bottle. The plastic clattering against the concrete floor was the only sound in the room for a solid 10 seconds. Why was the shock so profound? Because in this business, nobody leaves on their own terms without making a noise about it, and certainly, nobody comes back without a parade. Zayda had broken the unwritten rule of celebrity. She had reclaimed her privacy. Her return shattered the illusion that we, the fans and the peers, know everything. The locker room was stunned, not just because she was back, but because they realized they never really knew where she had gone. The air in the room shifted from camaraderie to immediate, palpable tension. The ghost had walked back into the machine, and the machine didn't know how to process it. As the initial paralysis of the moment wore off, the atmosphere backstage shifted from silence to a frantic, nervous energy. If the first phase was shock, this second phase was paranoia. In the world of professional wrestling, a spot on the card is the most valuable currency. There are only so many minutes on television, only so many championship opportunities, and only so much spotlight to go around. When someone like Zayda Steel returns without warning, the math changes instantly. Visualize the stick figures now, huddling in small groups. The animation should show text bubbles popping up rapidly above their heads, representing the flurry of messages being sent. Did you know? Is she in the main event? Who is getting cut? The trust that holds a locker room together began to fracture in real time. The veteran wrestlers, the ones who have seen people come and go for decades, looked weary. They know that a return like this usually means a disruption of the hierarchy. They were looking at the younger talent, the up-and-comers who had just started to get comfortable in their spots. With a mix of pity and warning, Zayda wasn't just a person returning. She was a force of nature that was about to displace the water everyone else was treading. We saw one specific interaction unfold in the corner of the room. A rising star, someone who had been getting a significant push in Zayda's absence, visibly slumped against the wall. The animation here should be subtle, a lowering of the shoulders, a head in the hands. It wasn't anger. It was the crushing weight of realization. This superstar had spent months building a narrative, working through injuries and doing the media rounds, thinking the path to the top was clear. In the span of 30 seconds, that path had become a mountain again. The paranoia wasn't just among the talent. The backstage producers, the road agents responsible for putting the show together, were scrambling. You could see them flipping through clipboards, crossing things out, making frantic calls on their headsets. A script in wrestling is often rewritten, but this felt different. This felt like the script had been thrown into a shredder. What made this ripple effect so fascinating was Zayda's demeanor through it all. She moved through the chaos like she was in a bubble of calm. She found her old locker which, miraculously, or perhaps intentionally, had been left vacant and began to unpack her gear. She didn't engage in the whispers. She didn't look at the panic she had caused. This disconnect between her calm and the room's chaos created a surreal tension. It raised the question, was this planned by the highest ups, or was she going into business for herself? In an era where work and shoot lines are blurred, Nobody knew if they were watching a storyline unfold or a legitimate backstage crisis. The uncertainty was the fuel. The locker room, usually a place of brotherhood and sisterhood, had turned into a survivalist camp. Everyone was suddenly looking out for themselves, calculating their new odds. And in the center of the storm, Zayda Steel simply tied her boots, the sound of the laces tightening, echoing like a countdown clock. To truly understand why the locker room was paralyzed, we have to look backward. We need to explore the why of her departure, even though she never spoke of it publicly. The story of Zayda Steel isn't just about wrestling matches. It's about the human cost of greatness. Let's drift into a flashback sequence. Imagine the animation style changing slightly, perhaps becoming a bit grainier or sepia toned to represent memory. We see Zayda months ago. She was at the top of the world, or so it seemed. She was on every poster, in every promo package, holding gold. But look closer at the stick figure. The posture was bent, the lines drawn under the eyes were heavy. She was winning, but she was hollow. The wrestling industry consumes people. It asks for your body, your time, your family life, and your sanity. Zayda had given all of it. The rumors back then were that she was difficult or moody. But looking back now, through the lens of this quiet return, we see the truth. She wasn't difficult. She was empty. She didn't leave because of an injury that you can see on an X-ray. She didn't leave because of a contract dispute over money. She left because the noise had become too loud. One night, after a main event match that the critics loved, she simply walked past the curtain, packed her bag, and drove into the night. No retirement speech, no thank you tweet. She just stopped. For the locker room, this was terrifying. Wrestlers are conditioned to hold on until the wheels fall off. To walk away when you are healthy and successful is an act of rebellion. It insults the grind that everyone else is committed to. So, when she left, they vilified her in whispers. They called her a quitter. They said she couldn't handle the pressure. But now, seeing her return, a different realization washed over them. During her time away, while they were destroying their bodies on the road, she had been healing. The animation should show her in solitary moments during her absence. Sitting by a quiet lake, reading a book, healing injuries, reconnecting with who she was before she became a character. This context is why her return was so stunning. She wasn't coming back desperate for a paycheck. She wasn't coming back because she missed the fame. She was coming back because she was whole again. And a whole, healed, focused athlete is infinitely more dangerous than a broken one. The ghost of the past wasn't haunting her anymore. She had faced it down in the silence of her time away. The other wrestlers, still trapped in the grind, saw something in her eyes that they desperately wanted for themselves: peace. They were stunned not just by her presence, but by her aura. She had escaped the machine, fixed herself, and walked back in. It was a mirror held up to everyone else's exhaustion. She was the ghost that came back to life, and it made everyone else question if they were the ones who were actually dead inside. While the locker room dealt with emotional turmoil, the offices down the hall were in a state of administrative meltdown. This is the part of the story where the suits come in: the executives. The writers, the people who think they control the narrative. In our animation, visualize a glass-walled office overlooking the arena. Men and women in business attire are pacing back and forth. Papers are flying. The red phone on the desk is blinking incessantly. The return of Zayda Steel wasn't on the run sheet. It wasn't in the email blast. It wasn't in the budget. The confusion here is critical. Usually, a return is orchestrated weeks in advance. Music cues are tested, merchandise is printed, and social media graphics are prepped. But Zayda had bypassed the entire corporate machine. How did she get into the building? Who authorized her pass? The security guards were shrugging. The talent relations department was frantically checking contracts. It turned out, there was a loophole, a clause in her old contract, buried in the fine print, a toll on her time that hadn't expired. Technically, she was still an employee, just one who hadn't shown up. And legally, they couldn't stop her from entering the workplace. She had outsmarted the system by simply following its own forgotten rules. The writers were the most panicked. They had a show written, the script was locked, the main event was set. Now, they had a star-power nuclear bomb sitting in the locker room, and they didn't know whether to defuse it or detonate it. If they sent her out there, she might say anything. If they kept her backstage, the crowd who would inevitably find out she was there via social media leaks that were now starting to trickle out would hijack the show with chants of her name. We see the head official, a stressed stick figure with a loose tie, walking down the hallway towards Zayda's area. He looks like a man walking to the gallows. He approaches her. The room holds its breath. They expect shouting. They expect a security escort to throw her out. Instead, the animation shows a quiet conversation. Zayda doesn't stand up. She doesn't yell. She simply looks up, says a few words, and nods. The official stops, looks at his clipboard, looks back at her, and slowly nods back. He turns around and walks away, looking even more pale than before. He walks back to the writers and drops the clipboard on the table. The animation zooms in on his face as he mouths a single command: change the main event. The power dynamic had completely flipped. The billion-dollar company was bending the knee to the individual. They realized that stopping her would cause a riot, and using her was the only way to save the night. They were no longer the puppet masters. Zayda had cut her strings, and now she was pulling theirs. The chaos in the office was the sound of control evaporating. The show was halfway through. The crowd was restless. The rumors had hit Twitter X. People in the audience were looking at their phones more than the ring. The energy in the arena was a bubbling pot about to boil over. Backstage, the path to the gorilla position, the area right behind the entrance curtain cleared out. Usually, this area is crowded. But tonight, as Zayda Steel began her walk from the locker room to the stage, people pressed themselves against the walls to let her pass. It was a walk of reverence. The animation should focus on her boots, hitting the concrete floor. Step, 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 rhythmic, determined. She reached the curtain. The darkness of the backstage area met the blinding lights of the arena. The noise of the crowd was a muffled roar, like the ocean during a storm. She stood there, closing her eyes for a moment. This is the moment every wrestler lives for, but for Zayda, it was different this time. She wasn't seeking validation. She wasn't there to hear them chant her name so she could feel good about herself. She was there to finish a story. The music hit. It wasn't her old music, it was silence. Then, a single, sharp violin note, followed by a heavy, driving beat. The crowd didn't pop immediately. There was a split second of confusion. Then, the name appeared on the Titantron. The reaction wasn't just a cheer, it was a sonic boom. The Stickman crowd animation should vibrate with intensity. Arms in the air, signs shaking. The shock we saw in the locker room was now mirrored by 50,000 people. Zayda walked through the curtain. She didn't dance. She didn't pose. She walked to the ring with the same calm she had backstage. She climbed the steps, entered the ropes, and asked for a microphone. The locker room was gathered around the monitor in the back, watching in silence. The executives were watching from the glass office, holding their breath. Zayda raised the microphone. She looked at the camera, breaking the fourth wall. "I didn't come back to take my spot," she said, her voice echoing through the arena. "I came back to remind you that this spot doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to the one who is willing to walk away from it to save themselves." She dropped the microphone. The twist in reflection. The twist wasn't a heel turn. It wasn't a violent attack. The twist was the realization of what her comeback actually meant. As the screen fades to black on our video, we reflect on the true nature of this stunner. The locker room wasn't stunned because they were afraid of her talent. They were stunned because she broke the cycle of abuse that the industry relies on. Wrestling relies on the idea that the wrestlers need the fans and the company more than they need oxygen. Zayda proved that was a lie. She showed that you can leave, you can live, and you can come back stronger without the machine's permission. The "no one saw this coming" wasn't about the surprise return. It was about the fact that no one saw a wrestler possessing that much self-worth. In the end, Zayda Steel didn't just win a match or a title that night. She won the argument. And as the locker room dispersed, returning to their noise and their grind, every single one of them carried a new, quiet thought in the back of their minds. Maybe I don't have to stay here to be someone. Maybe the real power is knowing you can leave. That is why the silence was so heavy. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. And that is a story that changes the game forever.